Right. To split the dataset, we first need to know which columns contain text data and which ones store numeric values. As we just saw, we can obtain this information from temporary mean. Therefore, we'll create a variable called columnStrings and combine the argument where and isNaN functions to get the indices of the columns which only contain strings. If you recall, the default condition for argument where tests whether the values are different from 0. So, if the column contains only text, its mean is NaN. Then, isNaN returns true for that column. Since true is different from 0, argument where returns the index of this column in the original dataset. If we display columns strings, we'll see a 2D array which stores each value in a separate vector. However, the variable which stores the results must be one-dimensional. Thus, we add the squeeze method at the end of the line and rerun the cell. Perfect! We also want to know which columns contain numeric values. So, in a new cell, copy the code we just wrote, change the name of the variable, and set the condition of the function equal to false. The output is a 1D array that contains the rest of the indices. Thus, with the help of the useColumns parameter, we can now re-import the original dataset as two separate arrays. In a new cell, we'll paste the code we used to import the dataset earlier in the notebook. Then we'll change the name of the variable to something more appropriate, like lone data strings. After we're done, we'll set the useColumns argument equal to columnsStrings. Lastly, we'll define the data type to the NumPy strings. As always, we'll check the contents of the variable on a new line. Seems that we are only having text data. Good. We still need to load the numeric data, so let's copy the code we just wrote and paste it into a new cell. Then we'll switch the variable name to lone data numeric. Next up, we'll change the input for the useColumns argument from columnsStrings to columnsNumeric. We don't want to load the values as text, so we'll remove the dtype argument. However, we must fill in any missing data. Let's set the filling values argument equal to temporary fill. The difference in the approach results from handling missing values among strings and numbers differently. Once again, we'll display the newly created variable. We see an array full of numbers, so we've successfully split the data into two. For convenience, going forward, we'll refer to this array as the numeric dataset, while we'll call the other one the string dataset. Fantastic! Now that we have our two datasets, we're almost ready to manipulate their contents separately. Almost, because we cannot work on the contents of the tables unless we've stored the headers of each column first. Otherwise, we'll lose track of what information we're storing in each column. To do this, paste the code where we imported the strings part of the dataset. Then we can change the name of the variable to something more appropriate, like header full. Remove useColumns. And lastly, change skipHeader to skipFooter and set it equal to the number of rows in raw data NP. As a matter of fact, the last bit tells the function to ignore all rows after the header. This works because when we imported raw data NP, we skipped the header, so the variable contains one less row than the original CSV. As always, we'll also display the output to make sure we've successfully stored all the column names. Great job! Now, let's split the headers into two variables, each one holding the names of the columns which contain string data or numeric data. Simply write the names of the two new variables separated by a comma, and set them equal to header full. Then, in the square brackets, add columnsStrings. Finally, add a comma and paste this statement, but change columnsStrings to columnsNumeric. This should create two new variables, which we'll later use as headers for the two smaller datasets we're creating. Of course, in separate cells, we can display these variables and check their contents. Everything looks good, which means we can mark the end of the preliminary setup of our data here. Moving onward, we will manipulate the two obtained datasets. In the next lecture, we'll begin pre-processing the string dataset. Thanks for watching.